A very warm welcome to all our participants, our entire audience, to this open house discussion on the Myanmar coup and the Rohingya crisis role of the courts. This is Faiz Ayat Ansari, Assistant Professor, Parul Institute of Law, Parul University. As you all know, that we carry out a series of open house discussions on very contemporary legal issues, whereby we invite esteemed panelists to carry out a very intellectual discussion on that particular topic and entertain each and every one of us. So here we are today. Before actually formally welcoming our esteemed panelists today, I'll just give a brief introduction of our both the panelists. First of all, we have got Mr. Nizamuddin Ahmad Siddiqui. He is a senior research fellow and PhD candidate at the Jindal Global Law School. He was previously an assistant professor of law at National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, an assistant professor at the Department of Law, Aligarh Muslim University, Murshidabad, and a visiting faculty in law at Faculty of Law, Alaya University, Kolkata. He has done his LLM from the Faculty of Legal Studies, South Asian University, and amongst his various achievements, he also holds a postgraduate diploma in international law and diplomacy from the Indian Society of International Law, where he was awarded with the V.K. Krishna Menon Memorial Gold Medal. He holds an LLB from the Faculty of Law, Aligarh Muslim University as well. He has been the recipient of the Shaiman Academy of International Law Scholarship to attend its summer course in international law in the year 2015. So Mr. Siddiqui basically engages with today's topic through his various scholarly works, which he has recently published across various platforms, one of them being the Social Legal Review. Secondly, we have got Maria Kiseleva. She is a law graduate and is finishing her master's thesis in political diplomacy, international and European law at Coimbra University, Portugal. She is an aspiring diplomat, having concluded an internship in the Portuguese Embassy of Angola, as well as a human rights activist and a former member of Amnesty International Portugal. Maria is the global ambassador for youth opportunities in Portugal and is working in Adamastor, an association for the development of youth democratic participation and inclusion. She is also working on the project Refugee World United, a recently created platform which aims to educate for global inclusion and inform about the migration flows and problems all over the world. So, I first of all would like to request our senior faculty, associate professor at the Faculty of Law, Dr. Pallavi Dubey, to just formally welcome our esteemed panelists and also declare open the session. Ma'am.
Thank you, Faisal. A very good afternoon to both of our panelists, Nizamuddin Ahmad Siddiqui sir and Miss Maria ma'am. On behalf of Parul Institute of Law, Parul University, I welcome you both for this open house discussion. And as we have students from different nationalities, in law we have students from more than 8 nationalities. So I'm sure our students are going to gain a lot of knowledge from both of you. So I welcome you both and handing over the session to Faisal.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So this is it. So we no longer have to wait any further. Let's start off this open house discussion. I'll be the moderator for this session. So first of all, I'll put up a question to you, Nizamuddin sir, with respect to the entire legal basis of the Rohingya issue as such. What are the legal foundations of this entire issue, this entire debate, in order to, if you could enlighten our audience for the same.
Thank you, Faiz. Thank you, Pallavi ma'am. And I also thank Parul Institute of Law, Parul University, for inviting me to this panel discussion, which is very, very important. and I see this as also an opportunity to engage with a broader audience on issues that are that engage us very seriously in times of crisis around the world. So, answering your question, Faz, see, refugee crisis is a, it becomes a problem at two levels. The first thing is when it is basically a problem of nationality. That's how I see it. When a person is either not provided a national status under the domestic law, which the international law wants the states to give. International law does not define what is nationality and how to give nationality. It only says that you need not you should address the situations of statelessness. So it is the states who give nationality. So it is a question of nationality, because one, either you do not have nationality, so you become stateless, or even if you have nationality, you are not given the protection that you should have got from nationality, because nationality is the link that that attaches an individual with the state, and it also gives protection to the individual with respect to the affairs of the state or with respect to the affairs of another state. So the fundamental problem is the problem of belongingness. Where do you belong to? The issue of nationality. Now, with respect to the Rohingyas, this is very problematic, because at least three states, India, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, they do not see them to be belonging to their territory in one form or the other. So that's one problem, and that's a human rights problem. The second problem is the refugee problem, which we are discussing more specifically today. Now, refugee law is looked at as a separate regime, even though it is connected with human rights law, but it is created as a separate regime for people who cannot enjoy protection to their rights, and people who flee for the persecution of their rights into another territory. So on the count of refugee law, again, you have a problem, because the principle of non-refoulement is fundamental to refugee law, which says that once a person has fled from persecution and entered into your territory, you cannot send the person back, and so that he or she may be exposed again to the same persecution. Now, this again goes into the Rohingya crisis, because the Supreme Court has not looked into this matter in its most recent judgment. So I think these are the foundations for the legal issues on the refugee crisis that we face.
Right, sir. So, as the title of our open house discussion is also focusing on the role of the courts, we'll come to it later on. But if you could throw some light on what the other organ of the state, that is the government itself, the legislature, what has the government of India done as of now, as far as this entire crisis is concerned? What is their role? What do you see it panning out?
See, again, this is a question of giving protection to people within your territory. See, with respect to any person that enters into your territory or that is residing in your territory, there are 2-3 ways in which the person is classified. Either the person is understood as a national, so you have to give the person the nationality status and give the person the protection under national laws, or the person enters into your territory as an alien. For example, a US citizen comes into India to study or to visit for any research project. So then the person gets protection under the domestic law as per an alien. Then the third category is person who is given the protection under the law, and these are called as the refugees. Now, these are not nationals, these are not aliens, these are categorized as people who have been given protection. So now, when you give protection to these people, this becomes a question of jurisdiction. This is a question of jurisdiction. How do you give protection to that individual? Now, if you look at the jurisdiction, if you go to the classical international law, the jurisdiction is very clearly classified as legislative jurisdiction, executive jurisdiction, or judicial jurisdiction. So what you are in fact asking me is about the executive jurisdiction. In fact, what the government of India has done with respect to the refugee crisis. See, the government of India's response has been very, I would say, it's not been uniform. What the government has done is, over a period of time, beginning 1950s, because if you look at the government of India, it ratified the Genocide Convention in 1948. So it talks about protection of people from, being persecuted to that extent. So government of India's response has been very dynamic. It has classified some people as protected minorities or as protected people. It has not classified some people as protected. It gives we can discuss this a little bit later as well, but then it has this policy of long-term visa, which it gives to some of the people inside its territory, and then it does not give to the others. And then the 2019 the Citizenship Act comes, which again categorizes people. So in a sense, the government of India's response has been very dynamic, and you cannot locate it. I would I would invoke here Schrodinger's cat experiment. You do not know whether the cat is dead or alive. Or in fact, I can use the physicist's example. The Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You cannot locate the position as well as the momentum of a particle. So you cannot locate what does the Indian government want and what does it want to address. It's very difficult to understand. Yes.
Great, sir. Maria, coming to you. So, as we know that it's a fact, basically, that the Rohingyas are the most persecuted group of people across the world. So, it's no longer, of course, it's Myanmar being the primary stakeholder in this case, as well as Bangladesh and India. But it's no longer a regional issue as such. It's pretty much a global issue. So, I would like to ask you that what is the take of your part of the world, European Union to be precise, on this entire issue, on this crisis? What has been the reaction in general?
Hello. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you also to Mr. Nizamuddin and to you, Faiz, and to the university for making me able to speak here and discuss with you. And about your question, well, as we know, European Union always tries, or at least I don't know about the effectiveness, but it tries to provide humanitarian help working with the UN and with the ONGs, the NGOs in English, ONGs in Portuguese. And since the beginning of all the crises that we can mark around 2017, when the biggest flow of migrants of Rohingya was registered, European Union has provided millions of humanitarian development and support for basic assistance, for hosting communities. And about these violations of human rights that occurred, European Union on last year, it has renewed some restrictive measures to Myanmar to try to fight with these military abuses that occur. So these restrictions basically forbid the European Union members to sell arms, to provide technical, financial support to the military of Myanmar. But some controversial thing is, even with these restrictions, due to the statistics, European Union is the third biggest business partner of Myanmar, is still. So this is pretty controversial. It's like it's restricting some parts in one hand, but in the other hand, it needs to keep Myanmar as a partner for other type of businesses. As we know, also Bangladesh, as you have mentioned, is hosting a lot of refugees. And during many years, Bangladesh has been stating that it's not capable to host them anymore, even against the principle of non-refoulement that was mentioned by Mr. Siddiqui. And so what European Union also have been doing is it have been collecting some funds, millions of euros, also for support of Bangladesh, and not only to support these small relatively small community that is still in Myanmar, but also the big part of refugees that are in Bangladesh. This after, before this coup, of course, the measures that were taken already.
Right. Great. So, sir, coming back to you. So, recently we have had rulings from the Supreme Court pertaining to this issue. So, has this been problematic? Has international law been upheld? What's your take on the rulings of the Supreme Court till now, as far as this issue in general is concerned? So you can unmute yourself.
See, I would refrain from saying that Supreme Court's stand is dynamic. I would not say that. It's not dynamic. It's ambiguous. It's confusing, in a sense. It's confusing. See, dynamic is when you change the stances from one side to the other. So you have two, for instance, two options. So you take this option or the other option. But Supreme Court's ruling is confusing because, I can give many examples. For example, in earlier cases, the Supreme Court has held the right of the refugees to be given protection. You have a number of cases. You have, Dong Qiang case, and a number of cases were there wherein the Supreme Court said that these people should be given protection. In 1980s, the government of India, and of course, Supreme Court must have appreciated that as well. It allowed the coming of people from Myanmar itself to come and settle in India and to settle in the refugee camps, and not as citizens, but settle in the refugee camps and to be given protection. And then the Supreme Court in this case, to the arguments of Prashant Bhushan and others, it accepts that Rohingyas are a persecuted community back in Myanmar. Now, keep in mind that the Rohingya crisis is usually discussed with respect to Bangladesh, India and Bangladesh. It is not discussed with respect to Myanmar. But the refugees that were detained and arrested in Jammu, that the immediate case which was before the Supreme Court, and the case name is Salimullah and others versus Union of India. So in this case, the people were detained in Jammu and they had to be deported to Myanmar. So the idea is to send them back to Myanmar. So we are talking about India-Myanmar relations, India-Myanmar context. So Supreme Court has agreed that the situation in Myanmar is problematic. Prashant Bhushan, during his arguments, he has brought forth the decision of Gambia versus Myanmar of the January 2020, saying that they fear persecution, they fear genocidal. The situation is genocidal because when in 2017, when the Rohingyas, they mostly, when they came to India, they were actually running away from the persecution at the hands of the Myanmarese military. Now, the military has done the coup and it is ruling the country as of now. So Prashant Bhushan argued that they are under persecution and they will be facing genocidal situation if they are sent back. And the Supreme Court said, well, yes, we understand that. The Supreme Court on record said that we understand that, but then it goes on to say that, well, but then we cannot comment on the situation, what is happening in another country. This is I don't know what does that mean. And then the Supreme Court orders the deportation of these people. So in a sense, the Supreme Court's stand is largely confusing with respect to giving protection to the refugees. And with respect to Rohingyas, it is more confusing because on one hand, you are saying that genocide can happen. We understand that, and their lives should be protected. And then on the other hand, you say, well, we do not know. We cannot comment on what is happening in another country, and you should deport them. So it's very confusing. I would not say it's dynamic. It's very, very confusing, ambiguous, and I would say it's very problematic as well.
Sir, many of our viewers would not have studied international law, So for their benefit, can you just, in general, briefly enlighten us as to what does international law say as far as the Rohingya crisis is concerned? What is the law as far as the crisis is concerned?
International law does not see. If you talk about the discipline of international law, it does not talk about any particular situation. It talks in general. So there are general principles, and then you apply those principles on the different contexts. That's how it works. Now, international law generally, as I said, and this is the baseline, one must understand this. International law says that there should not be any statelessness. That's the baseline for international law. Why does it say that? Because to whatever extent you argue for human rights, human dignity, human freedom, all of these are rooted through the institution of the state. Only the state can guarantee you the enjoyment of human rights. Only the state can have protection of human rights. So in that sense, while international law talks about reducing statelessness, it asks the states to give nationality, the protection of citizenship, the protection of refugees, the protection of aliens to the states. It is the states who have the responsibility to create a mechanism to do this. Now, and when the states are not able to do that, and when there is an interstate problem, because if an individual runs from one state to the other and seeks protection in the other state, then it becomes an interstate problem. Now, how do both states, they come together and resolve this crisis, resolve this problem? Now, their international law says if you cannot look at the nationality regime, if you cannot give them nationality, if you cannot look at them as aliens, at least give them protection as refugees. So this is the understanding which international law has. Coming to the Rohingya crisis, what the ICJ said in its judgment was that the Rohingyas, they are one of the most, in fact, the UN has also said that they are one of the most persecuted communities in the world because of their stateless situation. Now, remember, they are not stateless on paper. They have the UN refugee card. They know that they have it. But in effect, they turn out to be stateless. So international law says that if a person comes into your territory, which also includes Rohingyas, what you need to do is to give them protection. If you cannot give them protection, if you want to repatriate them, which is what is happening in India, what international law has recently provided is what is termed as the voluntary repatriation agreement. So voluntary repatriation agreements are the agreements that are signed between the two states. For example, India and Myanmar, they both agree that an agreement, they both sign to certain conditions. And then they also sign the agreement with UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees office. So they sign an agreement with that. Now, if you look at the Rohingya case in 2018, both Bangladesh and Myanmar, not in 2018, I think it's 2019, both Bangladesh and Myanmar, they entered into voluntary repatriation agreement with UNHCR as well as UNDP to repatriate these people to Myanmar. Now, the repatriation had to be done to Myanmar. They agreed to that. Even though, now, I'm highlighting the fact that the Rohingyas, they did not accept the agreement. They say, well, even if there was an agreement, but we were not consulted during the formation of the agreement, so we do not agree to that agreement. But we are not looking at that. We are looking at the mechanism. We are not looking at the effectiveness of the mechanism. What we are looking at is there is a mechanism in international law, even if you want to repatriate. What Indian court did was problematic. It did not allow the UNHCR to even represent itself. It said, well, you cannot say anything on this issue. So India could have taken it forward, with the repatriation agreement, and there are many other things that India could have done. So this is what international law provides with respect to, specifically you can, target this to the Rohingya crisis.
Very insightful, sir. Maria, as a co-founder of a project about migration and refugee flows worldwide, Would you state that this crisis is just one of the many, or would you say that there are certain particular characteristics about this particular crisis which is perhaps unique, and you can differentiate it from the other refugee crisis? What would you say on that?
Well, I think that if we speak broadly, we can possibly find similarities between the situations that give rise to the migration flows of all over the world. But I think you are right, and I agree with you when you say that uniqueness, when you mention that uniqueness, because if we look and research a conflict in particular, we will always see that it has a particular context and unique characteristics. And as it was mentioned already since the beginning, Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the UN, he qualified this minority as the most persecuted or one of the most persecuted ethnic groups in all the world. So from here, we can already start to think that it's already another level of crisis. And from 2017, mostly this minority have been suffering offenses. And the biggest problem is that it cannot find shelter anywhere because no country, no neighboring country wants to accept it. And even this year after the coup, the High Commissioner for Refugees was saying to the neighboring countries to help the Myanmar refugees. But as we see, the decision of the High Court of India still didn't follow maybe this recommendation of the High Commissioner. And this case that is being now analyzed by its merits on the International Court of Justice also shows, I think, the gravity of all this situation. And for me, even the fact that the International Court of Justice, it actually applied provisional measures to Myanmar. It shows that the court actually is believing, and the proofs provided by Gambia since the beginning are very strong. So I think this crisis is actually something particular and very different from the other ones, in my particular opinion.
Great. Sir, coming back to you, in your recent works, you have tended to mention that probably the international law, as it is right now, is not sufficient enough in the first place to deal with this crisis. Can you elaborate it a bit for our audience, for our students?
See, first is we must understand that any discipline, any discipline, for instance, constitutional law, criminal law, and for that matter, international law, it is created in certain context and it has certain boundaries within which it operates. For example, you cannot punish someone in India for the crime of genocide because the crime does not exist on paper. You can only punish people for killing. You cannot punish people for genocide because it does not exist on paper. So every discipline has its boundaries. So to expect that every problem can be addressed by the discipline is I think is a much bigger expectation. Now, unless you bring certain changes in the discipline, in the disciplinary discourse, it is not possible to always find solutions. Now, it is in this context that I talk about international law. Think about it. International law says that again, coming back to the nationality thing, I'm not going to give any nationality to anyone. States are going to give nationalities. Okay. Now, the only thing that international law does with respect to nationality is when there is a contest. As to nationality, whether the person belongs to that nationality or not, you have a number of cases. You have Nottebohm case, you have Barcelona attraction case. So whether the person belongs to this nationality or not, or whether the person belonging to this nationality can claim any protection or not, which is the Italian Marines case. The fishermen who were killed, they were identified as Indians, and therefore India took up the case against Italy. So in a sense, nationality becomes the purview of the state. So that's the first thing. So if the state is not willing to give nationality, you cannot go anywhere. So this is the problem. Number two, the problem of territoriality. the jurisdiction of the states is based on territoriality. So the jurisdiction is usually based on two things, either on territory or on the basis of the nationality. So for example, you come to the Rohingya crisis. The Rohingyas are in India. So can they get protection? No, they cannot get protection, at least as far as nationality is concerned. Okay. Why? Well, that's very evident. You look at the court's judgment, the court's ruling, as well as the recent write-up by Prashant Bhushan. He very clearly says, in I think it's in the Indian Express yesterday or day before yesterday. He very clearly mentions that during the proceedings, the court said whether you can claim any protection for these refugees under Article 32. Can they get any protection under Article 32, which actually talks about the remedies before the court in case your fundamental rights are violated? You can go before the Supreme Court of India under Article 32 or the High Court of India in Article 226. The Supreme Court itself is saying, can they claim any remedy under Article 32? So which means that the nationality link does not work there. Now, later on, when it is argued, your lordships, Article 14 and Article 19 and Article 21, at least Article 9, let's not include Article 19, Article 14 and Article 21, they talk about non-nationals as well. So it works in this case also. So that's one thing. The second thing is territoriality. The jurisdiction is based on territoriality. Now, if you again go back to the Supreme Court judgment, wherein it says that Rohingyas' right not to be deported is based on their right to reside in the country. And since they do not have the right to reside in the country, they can be deported. Now, this is you cannot understand this. What is this reasoning? So both the elements of jurisdiction, they are not working in this case. The nationality jurisdiction is not working. The territoriality jurisdiction is not working. Okay. So this is the second thing. The third thing is the legal obligation. International law talks about obligations. You have an obligation to do this, and you do not have obligation. You have to follow this. Look at the ruling of the court. It says India is not a party to 1951 convention, and therefore the principle of non-refoulement does not apply. Now, I don't understand if the judges know what international law is. I seriously do not know, because principle of non-refoulement is not applied through treaty law as always. It is applied through customary law. And not only customary law, international law scholars, they say that this is jus cogens or jus cogens. So you cannot even, violate it in any situation. So again, you say you do not have an obligation. So in a sense, international law is, I would say, is not very well equipped as of now. I'm not saying it is not well equipped in future, but as of now, it's very problematic. How do you deal with this? I'll give you one more example now, which is very atrocious. Now I'm using this word with a very with a bit of restraint. But I have recent, yesterday the article that I wrote and was published in the Scroll. In response to that, someone was asking me questions on LinkedIn, and therein I had to say that this is atrocious. Now think about it. The person cannot live in your territory because it does not belong to your territory. The person cannot stay in your territory because the person is not a refugee. Then you say that the person should not belong there. Then what should the person do? The person should go. But the person does not have a nationality, for God's sake. He does not have a passport and a visa. So he cannot cross your borders even. So what happens is you make them chattels. These are like animals. You are treating human beings like animals. And there is no other option that you have given to them. So in a sense, international law is limited to that extent to resolve the crisis. The only thing that I foresee, and I would seek Maria's opinion on this as well. When you talk about the migration regime, if international law, which has begun, which was there earlier as well, but international law scholars are now trying to talk a lot about the international migration regime, wherein people should be allowed to move across borders as freely as the goods are moving across the borders. They are saying this. You are allowing the goods to move across the borders, but you're not allowing individuals to move across the borders. So they are talking about it. So if international law creates a cogent treaty or comes up with a customary law principle on international migration, that movement of people across the world should be facilitated, I think that resolves to a great extent the current problem.
Really fascinating insights, sir. Maria, would you like to comment on that?
I agree completely about the more facilitation of moving the goods and less facilitation.
Yeah, in general, yeah.
And exactly, and even the new plan that was proposed, because in the European Union last September, it was proposed a new migration plan, a new pact for migration and asylum. And it has some innovations, and one of the innovations is even the fingerprint of migrants, which was really controversial to identify them. So I can only agree that probably on trying to maybe make things easier or more safe, we are restricting even more the movement of the people.
Perhaps, yeah. Sir, coming back to you, so how do you see this crisis now going ahead? How do you see it panning out now? Yeah, I know it's difficult to predict as far as this is concerned, but still.
There is one aspect that we haven't discussed so far, which is very, very which we should discuss. The migration issue across the world is linked to two things, and interestingly, that has been part of the Indian history as well. So I'll come to the Indian history later, but the migration of people across the borders is linked to two very specific things. One is the right-wing movement that is happening across the world. So the right-wing movement, gives precedence to its own people. It says that the country belongs to it. It emphasizes a lot on the nation aspect of the state. Please remember, nation and state, these are two different things. The state is actually a construct that is created for the nation. So nation state, that's why it is called as nation state. So right-wing populism that is on rise around the world, it is emphasizing too much on the nation aspect. So that's why you have in America, Make America Great Again, which is now, under Joe Biden, they're trying to go back to the, earlier discourse. But this is what was happening, and this is across the world. You have it in Hungary, you have it in many other countries, including in India. We should not be shy, we should not feel shy about it, but this is what is happening in India as well. So, so that's one thing. The second thing, which is more problematic, is the securitization of the migration, wherein the migrants are classified as a security threat. Now, this is happening throughout the world, in Europe, in anywhere. You go to the several years back when there were refugee influx in Germany and France and other countries, you had this discourse that they are creating a threat to national security. So migrants as a threat to the security of the state. So these are the two things that are happening throughout the world. Look at India, what is happening in India. And that is what I have tried recently to do, is to, with my co-author, we have tried to, in a sense, link this with the debate in citizenship in India. Back in 1950s, when the citizenship was debated, the issue of national security was highlighted. For instance, people who for instance, Hindus who migrated from India to Pakistan and they were coming back, they were identified as refugees. They were given the refugee status. But the people who migrated from India to Pakistan and then they tried to come back again, they were looked at from the prism of national security, and they were treated as illegal migrants unless they are proven otherwise. So in a sense, I see the refugee crisis in India, especially the Rohingya thing, connected to that psyche, the psyche of national security. If you look at the Salimullah case, the earlier deliberations on the same case, the government of India was arguing that we have at least 40,000 Rohingyas in India, and they are a threat to national security. Now, even though you do not have a sound basis to argue that, but that's what was argued. So this is the situation as of now. Now, how do we move forward? Well, I think the solution to move forward would be probably the following. One is to foster friendly relations with your neighboring states. That you need to do. India is, India's international relations is on the decline on that, specifically with its, with its neighbors. If you look at the news, in fact, I think Home Minister made some of the statements during the rallies, and it has it has troubled the some minister in Bangladesh. So that's a problematic situation with respect to the neighbors. Second is, which is the most important, is to resolve the border disputes. India needs to resolve its border disputes with Pakistan, with Bangladesh, with China. It needs to resolve, because it is this border that creates problems for you. So that's the second thing that you need to do. That the third thing that you need to do is, you need to create a policy regime for the refugees, a policy regime which is, which you can understand. As of now, India's policy regime is very confusing. You do not know what it is. You give long-term visas to some, you do not give long-term visas to the others. You treat them as illegal migrants. So as Professor B.S. Chimney, he has also argued, he is an expert on refugee law in India. He has also argued that, India needs to have a sound policy regime on refugees. So that's the third thing that India needs to do. And then the fourth thing, which is again important, and which refers to their right to health and the right to live a life of dignity, is to give whomsoever is in your territory till the time the person is in your territory. Now, I'm not saying you should not repatriate them. I'm not going to take that stand, because this probably a deeper discussion might help us in discussing that. But even if you want to talk about voluntary repatriation, till the person is voluntarily repatriated to the other territory through an agreement with UN and with that country, and also bringing that person into the picture during the agreement process, at least treat those people with dignity. At least give facilities to those people. Now, again, look at the most recent example, the Mizo crisis. What is happening in Mizoram? The refugees, they have come into Mizoram. These refugees have come from Myanmar. They are coming, and so particularly they are not only Rohingyas, there are others as well. So they have come into Mizoram, and the Mizo government, what it did was, it granted them the refugee status. It said they are to be classified as refugees. But then the Union of India, the central government, it gave directions to 4 states, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, and the others, that you should identify them, you should locate them, and then you should not give them those facilities. You should classify them as illegal migrants. And then it says, which is very interesting, it says the state cannot give refugee status. It is the center which gives the refugee status. So you are wrong in doing that. And the Mizo government is saying, well, we are doing that because we have very close relations with those people who are coming into our territory. And we are not going to forget those close relations, the kinship relations that we have. And therefore, we are going to give them shelter. So in a sense, until and unless, till the time you find a solution, you need to give them a life with dignity, the facilities to live peacefully in this territory. I'm sorry for this long answer, but this is what I felt.
So thank you so much. That has actually opened up another debate in itself as far as federalism is concerned with respect to this particular topic. So even that can be discussed some other day. So thank you for taking that up actually. Maria, the same question to you as well. So how do you see this crisis going ahead? What's the future evolution according to you?
Yeah, I would actually like to comment what I think will need to happen from the part of the European Union. Also, I will try to get your opinion about some concern that I have about India. So firstly, I think about the European Union with this plan that I mentioned, the new plan on migration and asylum that is being developed now. it is clearly a reflection of the UN Refugee Convention that already exists if we read the project of the action plan. But some of these goals, it mentions situations of crisis and managing situations of pressure. And also it aims at provide more effective support for the refugees who are returning. So questions have been raised if it also applies to other states, not only European states, but also support to other states, third states, like Myanmar, for example. And as long as we know the answer is yes, it also applies to extra territorial part of European Union. And if it is like that, so for me, two measures would be crucial. Firstly, the European Union should give voice to the refugees that are inside Bangladesh, inside India, and make the governments not return them with force to Myanmar, in this case, Rohingya refugees. And secondly, if the European Union is actually supporting the refugees, so it should warranty also the good conditions in Myanmar for when they return. So firstly, the rights of them in the countries they are in now, and secondly, a safe return to their motherlands. I think it would be the best policy that the European Union can take as a support for these cases. And I would like to ask your opinion about something on the Indian law, because from my research and also from what you state, India doesn't have any regime for refugees until today, until now. And as probably India has many refugees, I think many flows during the ages, and even the Convention of Refugee exists since 1951. Do you have a particular opinion? Are there reasons why India is not managing to develop in these fields of refugee protection?
So, as far as my opinion is concerned, uh, I think it's more of a political issue rather than anything else, rather than having the expertise or coming up with, okay, let's say you don't want to enter some international convention, you don't have to sign the 1951 convention due to whatever reservations you may be having. But that does not stop you to frame your own domestic law, your own domestic set of rules and regulations. Even if there is an issue of extraterritorial jurisdiction, the Constitution of India itself does give the power to the Parliament itself to make extraterritorial laws. Okay, so just because of the fact that a law will be applicable not only within the territorial limits of India but somewhere else as well, and that fact does not make that law unconstitutional. So basically, nothing is stopping the government as such. It's more of a political or yeah, or a policy issue as far as I'm concerned. Sir, would you like to answer the same?
Yes, I have some thoughts on this. That's a very good question, Mary, actually. See, what I understand is India has a very peculiar situation with respect to refugees. And I don't know if that was the stand that India was taking, and that is, in a sense, backfiring as of now. What usually happens with the refugees is the refugee status is discussed with respect to individuals. So you look at the individual cases, and you look at the individual situation, the persecution and the reason for fleeing that territory, and then why did that person come into India, and what the person is going to do in India, and for how long. So there are a number of criteria that you do. So it is an individual thing that you do. But in India, the refugee thing is a mass thing. So that's a very peculiar situation. Historically, now what is happening in Europe as of now, it has happened with India with respect to, when India became India on paper. So that's the very problem. It happened at a mass scale. So you have thousands and lakhs of people coming into your territory in waves. They are coming in waves for a period of 5 years, 10 years. If you look at the Assam situation, it goes till 60s, 70s. So in a sense, a mass of people are coming into the territory. So it becomes difficult, and they are coming into the territory under specific situations. So what the government of India has done is it has tried to look at all of the people through that same lens. Now, the problem is, even if the lens has become old, you're using the same lens. Now, the lens of independence in 1950s was people coming from Pakistan, and that was the lens then. Now, you cannot use that same lens 70 years later, because those people who came into your territory, they have children, they have now grandchildren, and these people only know Indian territory. They don't know anything else. Now you look at the people using the same lens, that becomes problematic. So in India, the situation is, because it is a mass level thing, India adopted a different stand. And probably, if I'm not wrong, I read it somewhere as well, that Professor Chimney was also of the same opinion, why India is not party to the Refugee Convention. Because one of the reasons was, the Refugee Convention looks at the refugee problem in a very Western oriented manner. They look at refugees as individuals, as individual cases, and as individual instances. They're not looking at refugees as mass exodus of people, as a group of thousands and lakhs of people. And they're not looking at it from a security angle. So I think that was the reason why India looked at refugees in a different sense. But as far as I can see, this is backfiring. This is creating problems for India, because it is not allowing it to follow international obligations, and more than international obligations, not to give benefit to the people who are on the ground. So I think that's the way I would answer your question.
That's really important, sir. You brought up indirectly. You brought up the third generation rights, collective rights, so to speak, when we talk of international law. So that's really important. We are really short of time, so I'll just take up a couple of questions. I request the panelists to just answer them shortly because probably we won't be able to stretch it much. Maria, there's one question from a student that is the opinion from the entire European Union a unified one as far as the Rohingya crisis is concerned, or is there any divergence of opinion amongst the members of the European Union, as per your understanding?
Well, I think European Union mostly has different opinions, and maybe some states are more reluctant, but it's more about the migrants that actually come inside the European Union. So in this part, the European Union really has different policies. Some of states maybe want to be more restrictive, some of them more open, but as long as I know, in fact, the Rohingya crisis is of the same opinion inside the European Union.
Right.
And the case that is, and the case that is now in the international courts, it just confirms the genocidal intentions, and it makes the European Union also stand beside of the United Nations on this and have all the same opinion about the crisis that is happening.
All right. Thank you. And sir, the question to you is basically, it's a general one. What are the rights of stateless people as far as international law is concerned? So it's a very general question.
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Actually, see, if you're talking about rights in terms of endowments, in terms of giving you something, they have all the rights. But if you talk about rights being enjoyed, then you don't have any, because rights are enjoyed through the mechanism of the state. That's how international law does not give any right as of now. That's what I believe. That whatever I have understood till now is, it depends on the states to give and facilitate rights to the individuals. So they have all the rights on paper, of course, but to effectively exercise those rights, I don't think they have any, because they don't have nationality or refugee status or anything of that sort.
Right. Okay, so thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I believe a little extra time maybe was required for this session to get. We have a lot of questions from the students, but I tried to pick two, one each for both of you, so that we could end the session on time as well. I really thank you so much to both the esteemed panelists. I had to just pick two questions out of the many in order to conclude this session on time. Hopefully, we'll have more collaborations from both of you. I again thank you so much for being a part of this open house discussion at Parul Institute of Law. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faiz.
Thank you.
Any parting comments?
Maria.
All I can comment is that I just hope that it will be, all of us know that this situation will not be solved in a blink of an eye. It will not be solved tomorrow or maybe this year, but we just hope for the small steps and small developments that probably will help these people.
Absolutely.
From my side, I think this session was a very important session. The reason is we need to discuss this issue more and more, and students, professors, universities, they need to engage with these issues, which are very, very fundamental. You cannot treat human beings like animals. It's problematic. You say you're not allowed here, and then you cannot leave. We will take you, and it's like you're taking herd of cattle, herd of sheep anywhere. So this is a very important issue, and I'm thankful to the Parul Institute of Law, to Faiz, and to your team, to your dean as well, that they have taken up time to discuss on this very important issue. And I really enjoyed this session. I enjoyed listening to Maria and the questions of the students. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.